Back in my day, I distinctly remember two things when it came to video games. The first was that I was bad at them. Like, really bad at them. It would take me multiple hours just to get past the basic ass tutorial sections. The second thing I remember was that some of these games were genuinely terrifying. And when I refer back to my day, I specifically grew up with both the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube. And let's just say that some of the games on these consoles had no chill whatsoever.
Wow, it's Glover! This game sure looks neat!
Coincidentally, the game Glover also introduced little Andy to his first ever cuss word. Specifically, I remember that our 64 was shared between all of our family members, and one of our super edgy uncles decided to name a save file FUK. And yeah, let's just say Mama Andy was not happy when she saw that. But I digress. Today we're going to treat this video essay as a little therapy session, where I talk about video games that not only genuinely freaked me out as a kid, but ones that also had a profound effect on how I see the world today. Everyone knows the Nintendo 64 was huge for platformers, all of which were primarily aimed at children, but it didn't stop adult developers from putting some of the most nightmare-inducing fuel in some of these games. Obviously the ERSB has always been a thing, but I don't think some of the people that worked there were playing these games all the way through. You've got your obvious ones here, like that scary white dude in Ocarina of Time.
I'm making meats now. Smoking these meats here. Or a little meat smoking. Smoking these meats.
Or the piano in Mario 64. But the one that freaked me out the most was the game over screen that you can get in Donkey Kong 64.
And then there's Chunky! He's dead.
Not only is this the game over cutscene, but it also plays out if you just try to save and quit the game. King K. Rool's giant design here always freaked me out. I mean, just look at him. This man's an absolute unit. I would actively avoid hitting save and quit the title, and that's not really a good thing to teach someone who's just learning how to play video games for the first time. Saving is a vital aspect that would later become super important through my adolescent gaming journey. I never actually ended up completing DK64 until I was a teenager. Towards the end of the game, you get to infiltrate K. Rool's hideout and even get the chance to explore that room that traumatized me a bit as a kid. The fact that I was able to actually explore the room allowed me to take some of that creepiness factor away from it. But you still have to admit, that scene just feels super heavy for a kid's game. But then again, this is coming from the same developer that put this into the game. I'll never look at a monkey the same way again. It also seems I wasn't the only one who got something out of this scene. It became so iconic that it later became K. Rool's final smash when he later joined the Smash Bros. Roster. The GameCube was the first console that I owned for just me, myself, and I think that's why it really holds a special piece of nostalgia within my brain. Specifically, the first adventure game that I played was The Wind Waker, and what would later become my gateway drug into all things Zelda. At the time, people labeled this game as kiddie because of the cartoony cel-shaded graphics, but they didn't know some of the horrors you could unearth in this bad boy. Now keep in mind, I started playing this game when I was about 9, and I never really knew what I was doing. Specifically in the sailing parts, my tiny little brain couldn't comprehend wind direction, so there was a lot of times that I would just get lost sailing on the way to my destination. After the second temple, the game pretty much gives you free reign with traveling, and you're meant to sail northwest to your next destination. As soon as you leave the forest haven, the skies get dark and gloomy, and a super ominous version of the Great Sea starts playing in the background. I was already low-key starting to freak out at this point. Especially because your destination is so far, I was constantly getting lost and turned around the whole time there. I managed to get really close to the island until... Little 9-year-old me was in full panic mode at this point. I was awestruck by this giant creature and had no idea what to do in this moment. I genuinely did not feel comfortable picking the game back up until I learned more about the giant squid and how to avoid it. So little me turned on my family's slow-ass computer to look up a walkthrough. I was able to learn that you can locate the giant squids when you see a flock of seagulls over the open ocean. But honestly, it was pretty hard to see them sometimes, especially in the stormy environment that I was in. The GameCube also did not have the best draw distance, so I was constantly pulling out my telescope to see if I was going to be running into another one of those sons of bitches. So yeah, that was a pretty big thing in the early days of my gaming career. I still honestly get pretty nervous when one of those rats with wings even comes close to my boat. Even in real life, if I see a circle of seagulls over an open ocean, I still low-key get PTSD and flash back to that original moment. Another game that had a profound effect on me was Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life. The crazy thing is, the thing that I was most scared about as a kid isn't even possible to pull off in the actual video game. Walkthroughs at the time were fairly reliable, but there was also a decent amount of rumors and misinformation being spread online. Smash Bros. Melee was probably the most infamous. I distinctly remember seeing all these ways to either unlock Toad or Sonic in the game and thinking it was legitimate. Either way, one of the biggest things about Harvest Moon is forging relationships with the other villagers. You can't really figure out what the villagers wanted without trial and error, so that's where the online walkthroughs came in handy for me. Everything was going swell for little Andy, until he met Daryl. This weirdo is constantly walking around your farm at night with bloodshot eyes, staring menacingly at your cows. I'm not actually sure what triggers this, but if you walk out of your house at night, this rather, let's just say, interesting scene plays out with him. This scene really freaked me out as a kid because I worked really hard to get those cows, and I was not about to have this weirdo junkie just up and steal them. This is where I looked up a walkthrough to learn more about him, and the walkthrough in question said that if you don't give him gifts, he will at some point in the game abduct one of your cows. Which, obviously now I know it was completely false, but back then there was no one online to discredit that information. So little Andy took it upon himself to give Daryl a present at every opportunity he could. This guy was so intimidating to me that he essentially made me his gift servant. So yeah, that certainly didn't help with the general social anxiety that was already starting to butt up within me, and to whoever made that false walkthrough, your mom's a hoe. It could just be me or even nostalgia, but I really do feel like video games in the early days just had a genuine creep factor to them. Even games like the first Luigi's Mansion, I still feel is way darker and sinister than its later two sequels that would come out 10 years later. Not to say that current games don't get really freaky, I personally just found it super off-putting that the majority of these games were marketed to kids at the time. So at the end of this little therapy session, what did I really learn about myself?
I'm still a piece of garbage.
If you've had a similar experience where a game may or may not have scarred you for life, tell me about it. Come on, tell me. I now diagnose you with gay.